So I'd like to welcome our guests to another episode of Phenomenology of the Phenomenon. This is a series where we explore the application of the philosophical tradition of phenomenology to the study of unidentified aerial or anomalous phenomena and close encounters. The series is produced by the Society for UAP Studies, and I am the host, Kimberly Engels. I'm very excited about my guest today. I'm joined today by Mike Clelland, who is the author of The Messengers. Mike, thank you so much for being here with me today.
I'm happy to be here. It's my honor. Thank you.
All right. So to just tell the audience a little bit about Mike, Mike Clelland's 2015 book, The Messengers, was met with high praise. In it, he explores the mysterious connection between owls, synchronicities, and UFO abduction. It was his first-hand experiences with these elusive events that have been the foundation for his research. The book is also a personal memoir, a journey of self-discovery. Mike also hosts the Hidden Experience podcast that he began in 2009. The show features extended audio interviews with visionaries and experts examining the complexities of the overall UFO or UAP experience. He also hosted The Unseen on Whitley Strieber's network. He's considered an expert in the skills of ultralight backpacking, an author and illustrator of a series of instructional books on advanced outdoor techniques, and he now lives in the Pacific Northwest after previously living for 25 years in the Rockies. So once again, Mike, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited about this conversation and where it might lead. So for our audience and our viewers who may be joining us for the first time, I always like to do a little overview or a little summary of the phenomenological method and the tradition of phenomenology. So the idea of phenomenology is that it's a philosophical method that is rooted in rigorous examination of first-person consciousness and first-person experience. So the founder of phenomenology is Edmund Husserl, and he advocated for a method of bracketing in which we suspend judgment on the source or origin of what is being interacted with and describe very carefully what appears and in what modalities. So a phenomenological analysis involves describing exactly what appears to the individual, as well as how what appears is received, organized, and classified by the conscious subject. So while science is focused on collecting physical evidence that can be objectively verified in controlled conditions, the phenomenological method rigorously examines the experience of the witness, what they saw, heard, sensed, felt, and formed judgments about, and how they integrated this into their experience of self, other, and world. So with that description in mind, Mike, I'm really excited to discuss your work today. You're known in UFO circles as, the owl man or the owl guy. The presence of the owl in the lived experience of the witness or in the lived experience of UFO encounters, again, I don't think it's something that, we can use the straightforward scientific method to understand. I think we really have to understand, again, how the owl is presenting in the conscious experience of the witness and how the appearance of the owl is kind of integrated into an understanding of the overall experience. Before we dive, too deep into that, I would like to hear a little bit from you. How did you first get interested in the topic of the connection specifically between UFO sightings and sightings of owls?
Well, it was my own direct experience. I had in 2006, which is almost 20 years ago. I guess it's 18, 19 years ago now. 19 years ago. Yikes. I was camping with a friend in the Tetons. I was living in Idaho, and the Tetons is a range that's right on the Idaho-Wyoming border, right next to Grand Teton National Park. And this was a complete stranger. This was someone I really didn't know, and it was a young woman that was working at the school I was working at. I was doing a lot of outdoor work at the time. I was 44 years old at the time. I'm 62 now, and so I've told the story many times, but people kind of like, you like took someone you really didn't know camping? Yeah, it's like, well, it's kind of like, yes, it's a camping culture. It'd be sort of like, living in Malibu and going surfing for upon meeting someone. So, but her name is Kristen. We're still close friends. And we went into the mountains, and it was October, and we didn't take a tent. It would have either been the very end of September or the very beginning of October. I actually don't have the exact date, but we went in with very light packs for just one night. We didn't take a tent. The weather forecast was going to be beautiful, so there's no worry at all there. Very reliable weather forecasting that time of the year. So we hiked in pretty deep with a light pack, got miles and miles and miles into the backcountry, starting in the afternoon. And there was a point when the sun was setting, and now I had been working in an outdoor school setting for the previous 15 years or so, and also I had spent the summer in Alaska, and I was just totally in my element, being outdoors. And so I was sitting on a big flat rock with Kristen and cooking on a little camp stove, and in this beautiful setting, and the sun was waning, and the stars were coming out, and we were having this conversation. Now, this conversation becomes important in a little bit. And I was like, wow, like I didn't expect this from a stranger. Like, this person has got a lot more depth, and she's smarter and more spiritual than I would have guessed. And it was at that moment an owl flew above us, and then a second owl, and then a third owl. And for what felt like the next couple of hours, 3 owls flew around us. They landed on tree branches near us. They were just flying around. They were right there. It was very obvious. 3 owls in the twilight were there. So we were camping in bear country, so we had to move. We had to walk like a half mile or so after we finished dinner. We cleaned up, put everything in the packs, didn't have much, walked up the trail another half mile, and found a beautiful spot to sleep. But these owls followed us. And so when we were lying down under the stars, this is Northern Rockies, amazing terrain, and beautiful starry skies that most people never see. So we were lying on our backs, and these owls would swoop right over our faces. Now, owls are very silent in flight, so there was no sound, but the stars would be blotted out for just a half a second. It was absolutely magical. So after this, we left the mountains the next morning. We were back by lunchtime, and I said, well, let's do this again. We should do this again sometime. She said, great. So 4 days later, we went camping in a different part of the mountains, and the exact same thing happened. At sunset, 4 days later, at sunset, 3 owls started flying around us. Now, before, 4 days earlier, they kind of kept their distance to a certain degree, but not this time. Wow, they were right up close to us. They were landing on the branch that was right next to us, and then they would land. One of them landed at our feet. I can still so clearly see Kristen's expression. She had this expression of just like just astonishment, and it was really electric. And so to have it happen once was pretty cool, but to have it happen twice with the same person in a different part of the mountains within 4 days of each other was positively like mystical. Now, I didn't say it then, but I'm saying it now. When that happened, both nights, I had a voice in my head that very clearly said, this has something to do with the UFOs. Now, I was looking at real owls. A voice in my head said, this has something to do with the UFOs. And it might have been my own voice. Obviously it's getting close to 20 years ago, but my strong sense was that this was more powerful than just a happenstance event of seeing some owls. In the aftermath, I started a blog, and I started looking into owls. And because of the voice, I've started looking at owls in the sense of their spirit meaning, their totem meaning. They're just like owls. There's lots of information about owls. They're fascinating creatures. But I was much more interested in their spiritual meaning, their mythic meaning. And because of that voice in my head that says this has something to do with UFOs, I started looking to my own experiences, which I've had a lot of. And let me tell you, at that point in my life, there was no way I was going there. Like, no way I was denying all of it. I had the textbook stuff that I was aware of. Now, at the time, I was like reading UFO literature. I had been reading UFO literature for a number of years. And so I was very well aware of the experiences in my youth of missing time and close-up sightings. And I wasn't going there. Like, I was not going to deal with this. But because of that voice in my head, I was like, well, I'm going to reach out. So I called up MUFON, and I eventually got a hold of, not through MUFON, but independently, I got a hold of a researcher named Leo Sprinkle, who's he's since passed on, but a remarkable guy. And so I started working with him, and then he said, oh, Mike, you should talk to this person. And then I'd just get this random phone call, and Mike, here's a person you should talk to. So I'd call these people up. And then we would have these conversations. And one of the questions I asked right from the very beginning to these people who were kind of, like I was struggling at that point. So, but the question I would ask is, have you ever had any odd experiences with owls? And it wasn't 100% of the people, but at the very beginning, it sure felt like 100% of the people. They would say like, oh man, like I got the weirdest story about an owl. And then they tell me these weird stories, and little by little, I kind of kept notes, and then I started a blog. And now the blog initially was just about synchronicities. And right away it turned into UFO stuff. And right away I started like sort of purging and sort of processing my own emotions and fears and nervousness about what was happening in my life. And now the story I just told about Kristen in the mountains and seeing those owls, I wrote that up that was one of my very first blog posts. I think it was the second blog post, I opened it in March of 2009. And I wrote in there, I said, she was talking about something interesting at the time of the event. So the event happened in 2006. 3 years later, I started the blog. So I reached out to her. She had since moved out of the valley. I hadn't seen her in a long time, but we kept in touch. And I said, Kristen, I got to ask, what were we talking about the very first night when we saw the very first owls? I remember we were talking about something interesting. She said, oh, I remember exactly what I was talking about. I was giving my deepest definition of what God means to me. Now, this shows up a lot in my research now, but I was kind of flabbergasted at the time. Now, I'm not at all churchy, but wow, did I recognize the mythic power of what she was saying. So right there at the beginning of all this, I was kind of front-loaded with like, oh, there's something more mysterious and bigger than just some owls. So I started collecting stories. I started writing down my own stories. I started asking for stories. So it didn't take long, very early on in all this, where if you Googled UFOs and owls, and this is consistent right to today, if you get on, do a search, Google UFOs, owls, on the first thing that comes up, about the next 25 things below that. And so if anyone anywhere in the world has had an experience with a UFO and an owl, they're going to find me in about 2 mouse clicks, and they are sending me their stories. So I have been at the receiving end of a remarkable number of stories, just a flood of them. I don't think it compares to the enormity of what Whitley Strieber dealt with in 1987, in the years after the publication of Communion, but it has been 1 or 2 good stories a day has been consistent for 16 years. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, 16 years since the blog started. So that's where I'm at. So, and then those stories turned into books, and now there's 4 books out, and it's been at the forefront of my life since that event.
Yeah, that's a really remarkable story. And the number of accounts that you're getting and that you're getting consistently, I think is really remarkable too. And so phenomenology as a method, we separate the appearance, so what actually appears in lived experience, from the individual's interpretation of it. Now, we note the interpretation, but we also note, what actually appears in the lived experience and in what conscious modality. So bracketing out for the moment, I want to get to interpretation in a moment. Mm-hmm. Bracketing out interpretation for now. In these stories that you receive and in these accounts, what are some of the ways that the owls tend to appear? And additionally, in what conscious modality? Is this all in waking state consciousness? Does it include dream state consciousness? Does it include altered states of consciousness? So how are they appearing? In what ways are they appearing? And in what conscious modalities?
Good. I'm writing some of this down so I can get back. Yeah. So I'm open to all of it. I'm open to dream states. I'm open to altered states. I'm open to the screen memory aspect. The screen memory aspect is something that I'm not sure. Should I just tap into that a little bit just so the listeners understand that a little bit?
If you want to start there, you can.
Okay.
That'll be fine.
So the screen memory, what shows up a lot in the UFO literature, especially in the people doing abduction research, is, I have a lot of examples of this, but this is a sort of typical example of someone's driving down the road at night and they turn a corner and there's a 4-foot tall owl in the road in front of them. And they say, wow, that's really unusual. And the owl either flies off or disappears. And then they get home and instead of it being 9 o'clock, it's 11 o'clock. So somehow there's 2 hours of missing time. And then if they do go through the process of, let's say, hypnotic regression, which I have strong opinions of, at the same time, I'm fascinated by it. The hypnotherapist may say, describe the owl on the road. And then they'll say, well, the owl has got a big bald head and it's got these big black eyes and it's skinny and it's got long fingers and it's wearing a tight fitting shiny spacesuit. And I don't think that's an owl. So what they're doing, what's happened is people have a memory of seeing an owl. And then when they dig a little deeper, that memory doesn't quite make sense. First of all, there's no such thing as a 4-foot tall owl. Wow. I get the 4-foot tall owl story all the time. And let me tell you, there is no place on earth that there has ever been a 4-foot tall owl. Like a 3-foot tall owl is just on the edge of what would be impossible. So there's something else that's going on. Now, the implication would be is that the UFO occupants, and just anecdotally, or having heard so many accounts, I would argue that it would be the gray beings, the grays, that would be doing these sort of psychic or technological measures to influence the memory of the observer. Now, the implication is that they are putting in a screen, an illusion of an owl, while it was actually a gray being standing in the road. Now, here's where it gets a little complicated. It's not just owls; it's deer and firemen and giant raccoons and squirrels, and there's all kinds of things that show up in this.
So can I just interject?
Sure.
Because I think this is really important. I didn't expect to go here, but I think it's an important point. I mean, the idea that the gray being or whatever, what the UFO intelligence is manipulating the memory. I think that is only one interpretation, right? I mean, just thinking about, I had Jim Madden on this program, and he was talking about how even in, the study of the brain, they've shown that, when the brain is making a representative image of what's there, it kind of just throws out its best guess. And if it's encountering something that it hasn't encountered before, it kind of constructs it, with this idea of that's like the closest thing that I can, that it can come up with as an image for what might actually be there. So, I mean, I'm really interested as a phenomenologist in these screen memories because it's something that shows up in the Strieber letters a lot too. Like,
oh yeah,
not just the owls. Owls is definitely one, but deer, buffalo. There's one letter in the Strieber files that I was reading. It's a kangaroo holding like a candle or something in the road, and that's very strange. But I'm wondering if the only conclusion to jump to is necessarily that the intelligence is manipulating what they saw. Is it possible it's something embedded in our perception processes that's producing that image, or or it's the human sensory system encountering something that it doesn't really know what to do with, right? If it is a gray being and it never or some other kind of being that it's never seen before, and that's kind of what it produces. It comes up with its best guess is like, the big eyes. It appears instead as an owl.
Oh, I'm 100% open to that being self-generated. So our unconscious or our autonomic mind processes does it instantly out of a defense mechanism or just the limitations of our perceptual abilities. Yeah, I'm totally open to that. Now it gets murky because I've talked to a lot of the people who do hypnosis and who do abduction research, and they will often say that somewhere in their interactions with these beings, the being will say, you will not remember me as I am. You will remember me as an owl or as a squirrel or as a deer or as a, so it gets a little murky here. I'll tell, this is an interesting story. I tell this story all the time because it just says so much. Of someone I trust, good friend of mine, had an experience. At the time she was 19 years old. And at the time she was well aware that she was having contact experiences. They had always happened at night. So she was working, teaching girls camping. It was a girls' camp situation, and they were in the mountains, and they were at a wilderness camp setting. So there's two campsites. They just needed the flat areas in the woods. So one is along the trail over here. Oh, you can't see my hands. So one is in the trail over here, and the other's over here, and there's a trail that connects the two. So she was walking through one group to the other along this trail, full daylight, sunshine. And she could hear the girls in the background. She could hear the girls laughing and talking in the background. So she turns a corner on the trail, and there's a gray alien standing on the trail, full daylight. And she said, in the full daylight, man, their big bald head was like chalky white. And this thing looks at her, and it was like totally caught off guard. Like, you're not supposed to see me. How can you see me? And now all this is a funny story, and she's really funny when she tells it. So the pretty much 100% of the communication that gets reported between these beings is telepathic. And so she doesn't see the lips move, but she hears this like reverberating kind of panicky voice in her head that seems to be generated by this being standing on the trail right in front of her. And it goes, owl, 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 owl. And she watches this thing morph from a gray being into a 4-foot tall owl. And it turns around and walks into the woods. Now, like, what happened there? Like, and I got a bunch of stories like that. I got stories like that where someone sees 4 gray aliens, and they give that expression like, "Oops, you're not supposed to see us," and then they turn into 4 deer. And so this is very rare, but these stories are out there.
Okay.
So it's totally murky, and this is the problem. And I try to, in my research, say as much. Like, okay, this is tough to research. These are murky stories. All you can really do is look for patterns. And so, like, I do have a pattern in the sense that I have a similar story where someone saw a set of deer instead of an owl. Now, so let's go back to, is this self-generated? Now, if it was self-generated and it was coming from our unconscious, the owl, I would argue the owl is like a primordial archetype, right? It's like, it's full of mythology. It's in our ancient lore. It's steeped with meaning, as is the deer. The deer is also steeped with meaning in our lore.
Absolutely.
So if they were to, so here's the problem. You ask the UFO researcher, and I've asked them, like, why owls? Why are they choosing owls as the screen memory? And the UFO researcher will say, well, it's because they sort of look like a gray alien, right? They got the big eyes, and they're kind of pale, and you see them at night. And I was like, well, what about people who see firemen? What about people who see giant cats or the kangaroo with a candle? Like, it falls apart if you really. So I would say that if they are choosing it, they're choosing it as an archetype. You know what? Actually, Jesus shows up. Not a lot, but Jesus shows up at a screen memory. Because people wake up and oh, I was like vacuuming my carpet, and then I felt like I needed to lie down, so I laid down on the couch, and then Jesus was in my living room. And then it plays out like a typical
UFO experience.
Oh yeah. So
That's very interesting. I've never actually heard that before.
well, it's in there. It's in the literature. It shows up. It's a pattern. I've read it more than once. But I mean, talk about an archetypal image. That's like Jesus. That's a big
I have
archetype.
heard, I guess, of religious figures. Like the Blessed
Sure.
Virgin has come up a few times in the
Oh yeah.
in the Streeter files for sure. So that
Yeah.
I guess Jesus also makes sense. I think maybe and I think you're making some really good points here as to why the idea that it's purely self-generated doesn't necessarily it doesn't hold that much explanatory power, or at least it can't explain all of these cases. And I think that it's very difficult to, in these experiences and UFO encounters in general and experiencer narratives, to really pull apart what's coming from the human mind versus what's coming from something outside of the human mind. Like that line is blurred quite often, not just with the owls and the screen memories, but with a lot of what's going on in this experience. And I think Whitley Strieber has mentioned this a few times. He's like, when these experiences begin, the human imagination also kicks in, like kind of a co-creator in terms of what's going on. And again, it doesn't mean that it's not real or that it didn't happen, but that the way that it's playing out in the experience may not be, a one-to-one copy of exactly. I mean, nothing that we encounter is a one-to-one copy. We're limited by our sensory and our rationality processes, but these experiences perhaps seem to be even more, I don't know if distorted is the right word, but to be involving, aspects of the human imagination in the experience, and that it can be difficult to kind of, parse out, what may have been there in a literal physical sense and what may have been, part of like this co-created conscious experience.
Yeah, I just read co-created, just as you said it almost there. Yeah. And so, and I would, what I say is oftentimes these events seem orchestrated.
Right.
And whether they are tailored exactly to the individual, right? I mean, does this non-human intelligence have a way to just immediately tap into our consciousness, the way we can tap into our hard drive when we do a search on our computer and pull out in an instant the exact file we need? Can they do the same things to our internal consciousness and say, oh, this person is Christian, so let's put Christian imagery. This person, is an artist, let's put artistic imagery in there. This person feels strongly connected to the wilderness, let's put wilderness imagery in. These are the kinds of things that show up consistently. I'm at the point where I'm like, I'll go crazy if I try to understand what the mechanism is behind the curtain.
Right.
And I'm much more at peace of just telling the story, relaying the story, and letting the reader or the person listening to me tap into how that story feels. And I can give you some examples and stories and such, but yeah, so I'm right there with you on this.
Absolutely. So this is really interesting so far. Just going back to the question, so screen memories seems to be one way that common in the stories that you receive. Do you receive a lot of stories that involve what people believe to be just that it was, physical owls? Seems like in the story that you told, your original experience, that even though you had the sense this has something to do with UFOs, those were live living owls that you were interacting with. So does that come up a lot too in what you receive?
Well, yeah, it does. And so I'm at the point now where and I say it straight out in the book. Like I got to explain the screen memory and I got to move on because once you've heard the 4-foot tall owl in the road story, like 500 times, you kind of get it. And then it's like the interesting stuff to me is the real owls that show up in these experiences.
Okay.
So that's at the core of my research. Wow, that's fascinating to me. Like, how does a real owl show up at the moment of these experiences? And so that's the aspect of this research that really floats my boat.
Yeah, would you like to just explain some of the ways that they, some of the stories or some of the ways that they appear, or that they're involved?
Sure. So here, this is a story I love telling, and there's no UFO in this story, but it really captures the essence of the like the fable-like quality or the dream-like quality of some of these things. A young Native American, he's in Michigan, and I think he was a member of the Huron tribe. And he was living on a reservation, and I didn't realize that. Oh, I'm getting a little bit of an echo. I didn't realize that that there was a reservation there. I grew up in Michigan. I looked it up on the map. It doesn't look like much. It looks like a neighborhood essentially. So he was flying a kite as a 12-year-old boy, and he loved this kite, and it was flying, and it was in this meadow, and the big gust of wind came along and pulled the kite and the ball of string, the string mechanism in his hand, got pulled out of his hand, and everything flew off into the forest. It flew away. There was a forest there. He could see the kite go, and then he saw it drop into the forest. And he got a friend. He said, "Let's go find the kite. I got to find my kite." So they walk into the forest, and they see the kite in a tree, at the top of a tree. So they walk to the base of a tree, and at the base of the tree is an owl, and it's all wrapped up in the string. So these little boys are like, let's get an adult. So they got an adult, and they came back, and they got some scissors, and they cut the owl free. The owl had been injured. They nursed it back to health and released it. And I asked, "Are you a shaman?" And he said, "Oh man, in a word, yes." And then he went on to tell me some stories where like being a shaman was not easy. Like this was a really tough challenge in his life in all kinds of ways. I'm not going to share any of that stuff, but the reason I asked, "Are you a shaman?" is because I have heard so many stories with that flavor and mood that came from shamans. I can talk about this more, but that story, like how do you make sense of that story? Like, how does an owl get wrapped up in the string? How does the boy find it? They save it. They set it free. Then he becomes a shaman. This feels more like a fable. This feels more like a dream than a real life experience.
Well, absolutely. It seems like, as you said, it seems like somebody almost making it up. It's like too much, but it seems like an archetype, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
like that's like what's really emerging here in story after story is that there are patterns in these experiences that sometimes are involving living physical beings and things happening in the physical world that are strange, that are bizarre, that seem there's too much going on to be mere coincidence, but also seem to unveil a deeper truth about the situation and mark a very significant point in that individual's life journey. As you said, the understanding of becoming a shaman. I guess what I'm trying to illustrate here is you can't divorce these strange happenings, even the ones that are, again, physical, from what's going on in the individual's life and their life path. It's like when you integrate all of it, that's when these patterns start to emerge. At least that's what I've started to see in my research of experience or narratives. So I guess maybe that's my next question. These experiences, okay, the owls are appearing. Sometimes they're appearing as screen memories. Sometimes they're appearing in physical ways and doing strange things like what you just described with the kite string. But how are they connected to the individual's overall experience of what Husserl called the life world, or what Sartre called their existential project, their being in the world?
Well, one thing, they become shamans. That's a consistent pattern. It's small, but that's a consistent pattern, and it's well understood within the community of shamans. That at the time of a shamanic initiation, people will have experiences with owls. The initiate will. And I told this same thing to a podcast host one time, and he gave me this kind of like sour look. And he's like, "Yeah, well, how do you meet a shaman?" And I was like, "You write a book about owls, you're going to meet some shamans. Like they come out of the woodwork and find you." So so the so here, let me clarify a couple things. So, and I wanted to do this in the talk in Texas, but time just didn't allow it. There are 5, all let's call modalities. So my initial research was owls and UFOs. That would be one thing. So owls and UFOs. That was like, I was all crazy about owls and UFOs for the first 10 years of me trying to dig into this stuff. And then that kind of faded away. And then I got, so here's, when the letters started pouring in, these other consistent patterns started showing up. One would be owls and meditation. People meditating would have experiences with owls. The others would be psychedelics, most particularly mushrooms. I got examples of other drugs essentially, but it's the overall is mushrooms. People taking mushrooms will see owls. Sometimes there's psychedelic owls that are obviously, oh, I took a lot of mushrooms and I saw a 15-foot tall owl like appear in my bedroom and it talked to me and it gave me this message. That's just as vital to me as the person who says, oh, I was with a group and we all took mushrooms together and an owl landed in the circle in the forest. And so I'm like, okay, it's symbolic owl, real owl, I'm open to both. And the other would be owls and shamanic initiation. And the final would be owls and death. And that is the richest vein alongside the UFO thing. I've got such a wealth of powerful stories about owls and death. Now, the folklore is that the owl is an ominous harbinger of doom. It foretells the death of a loved one. And in my files, I got a couple of stories like that, but I have an overwhelming amount of stories of owls showing up after a loved one dies, most often a parent. So a parent will die. The grieving child is trying to go through the process of coming to terms with the death of a parent. They will have a powerful owl experience. They will talk to the owl as if it is their parent. I got a story where a guy leaves the hospital. His dad has died of a heart attack. Late at night, has been up talking to the staff, the doctors. His father is dead. And he walks out of the hospital late at night. The electric door is open. He walks out on the sidewalk, and in the grass next to the sidewalk is a little owl. And nobody had to tell him what to do. He walked right up to this owl, right up to it, and said, "Dad, I love you. You're a great father. Really honored that you could be my dad. Thank you so much." That story is remarkably consistent. I got it so many different ways. And what happens is the grieving essentially is alleviated. This is really powerful. The grieving is alleviated with the interaction with the owl. And this is the one, if I was ever to write another big fat book about owls, I would write owls and death stories. And so these are the 5 modalities: death, shamanic initiation, psychedelics, meditation, UFOs. These, I'm looking for other patterns. I'm not finding them. You know what? It's interesting. I want near-death experience. That should fit. Wow, I'm waiting for that. Nothing. I got nothing. I got no evidence that the near-death experience is connected with the owls. Now, I will say that people who have had a UFO experience, an owl experience, and a near-death experience, I got a lot of those. And here's the consistent pattern in that I would say that 100% of the people that have contacted me with owl experience, a near-death experience, and a UFO experience are psychics, like powerful, off-the-chart psychics. My data, my research is all anecdotal. I'm just kind of crunching the numbers in my head without a formal way of processing them. But I'll stand by that one. So I held the floor for a long time. Sorry about that.
No, it's actually extremely interesting. I mean, when John Mack was researching the abduction phenomenon, he started seeing the parallels between alien abduction experiences and shamanic experiences in particular. And he has several chapters about that in Passport to the Cosmos. I've explored that connection just between shamanism, shamanic worldviews, and shamanic initiation and UFO experiences in some of my work. Because there seems to be it's not identical. Like there's certainly differences between shamanic initiation and abduction, but there's also some similarities in the structure in terms of, the removal to a foreign environment. And shamanic initiation experiences were often extremely unpleasant. Like involved, the dismantling of, the body, the spiritual body, and, being in a state of, near death for several days. But they would emerge from it with a totally different understanding of the world and the ability to travel within kind of the subtle realms, right? And Mac noticed that many of his abductees were going through, when they worked with him, and were able to integrate the abduction experience, they were emerging from it in a similar way, like, as you said, increased psychic abilities, but also profound changes in values, profound changes in their metaphysical understanding of the world, and the ability to seemingly be able to tap into these subtle realms, spiritual realms. And so he didn't see that alien abduction could be completely separated from these other types of extraordinary experiences that seem to have similar results. I mean, and Kenneth Ring compared, the alien abduction to the near death. And it saw, again, it's not identical. There's differences in the archetype, but there's also some similarities that are identified there as well. And I think, if we're going to understand the full scope of the experience or phenomenon and what people are actually experiencing and how this is integrated into their understanding of self and world, we have to look at these other types of experiences, these other modalities that you're talking about here, right? Like, you kind of checked all the boxes, like the meditation, the psychedelic states, the shamanic initiation, and then we all know Anne Strieber's famous statement about the UFO experiences when she came out. She was reading the letters and she says, this has something to do with what we call death. Mm-hmm. So owl is showing up, in relation to death. Also, that just doesn't come as any surprise. So I think, something that we do in the academy, and I promise that this is culminating in a question, but in the academy, we like to separate things out and study them, in their, first of all, by discipline, but also just focus on like one specific type of phenomenon and isolate it and really understand its essence, and, not to be casting too wide of a net, which actually is very important, and it has a role in having, scholarly and academic rigor in our work. But then sometimes I think because our disciplines demand that we do that, we fail to see, the bigger picture, or sometimes the bigger connections that are going on, right? I mean, there are still quite a few people interested in UFOs who don't think that UFOs have anything to do with shamanic initiation, or have anything to do with death, or have anything to do with psychedelic experiences, that it's all should be totally separate. And I do think there are meaningful differences to be fleshed out, but I also think that the connections are too strong to be denied when you zoom out a little bit and look at the big picture. So when you think about the big picture of the owl, having done this research, having all of these accounts, having these 5 different modalities here that you identified of the ways that they appear in different types of lived experiences, meditative experiences, psychedelic experiences, shamanic initiation, when you zoom out on the owl, what do you see? Like, why do you think the owl is showing up in all of these different types of experiences?
Wow. Okay. That's so I call those 5 experiences highly charged human experiences, right? So I talk to people and like, oh, I had a psychedelic experience on mushrooms, and I saw this powerful owl, and I was doing it ritually because I had alcoholism, and the owl psychedelic experience like allowed me to stay sober. So like these profound changes happen in their lives because of these highly charged human experiences. Now, so the owl isn't connected to the UFO in this, given this model. The owl is connected to the highly charged human experience. Now you look at those experiences, they could all be, you could just put mystical right above all of them, or you could put transformative right above all of them, right? And so, you know, you could have a transformative experience meditating, you get to death as the ultimate transformation, right? So you know, the shamanic initiation process in the ancient lore is, you know, you take the initiate into the cave, you know, the elders in the cave, like lock them in there for days, and then they let him emerge. Basically, they torture him, you know. So and then you get these people who say like, oh, the UFO contact experience was so brutal, and which I understand that. Like I'm not making light of that, and I don't want to demean anyone's experiences, but we are confronted with something that like you got to take 10 steps back and say, what is the freeze up? Have your audio.
Okay, you're back. You're back.
Okay. Did you miss anything, or did I freeze up?
You would just want to start back, or you were talking about that these are highly charged mystical experiences.
Oh, you missed a lot of that.
I don't know. Just a couple sentences.
Okay, so if we're looking at the highly charged human experience, right? So the UFO contact would certainly qualify for a highly charged human experience, as would any of the other modalities. You know, so these highly charged human experiences could be listed as mystical. They could be listed as spiritual. They could be listed as transformative. These are vocabulary words that are kind of loosey-goosey in a lot of ways. So here's what I'm seeing. People who have these contact experiences change. They change their lives. They quit their job. They go back to college. They start studying physics or psychology, or they quit their job at the bank and start doing work as a therapist. So this is a statistic that I would love to crunch the numbers and get a good answer to this. Anecdotally, I'm going to say 50%. It's just a rough guess, but it's a lot. The people who have owl and UFO experiences who reach out and contact me, when I ask them, what do you do for work? They say, well, I'm a Reiki therapist. 50% are doing Reiki therapy or some modality very, very similar to Reiki therapy. I could tell some stories about that too. So like I'm not looking at the big picture. There's like all this gloom and doom stuff, like, oh, the alien overlords are going to like make themselves known after disclosure, and we're going to be slaves here on Earth. And like, well, if that's the case, why would they be doing something so energetically hopeful, like turning a subsection of our population into Reiki therapists? I'm being kind of provocative in the way I frame all this right now, just to make a point. But so that's where I'm at in this, where I'm trying not to cling to the owls and UFO things, and I'm trying to be more open to the owl and the highly charged human event aspect. And when you do that, the overall emerging mythology, or the emerging mood, let's say, of these stories is much more heartening. And I want that. Like, I don't want to be trapped in this research if it's gloom and doom. So I recognize that I'm putting my own spin on this just to keep myself hopeful.
So thinking about the owl, as you said, all of these are transformative human experiences. And I mean, the owl seems to show up not just for literal reasons, but I think obviously for symbolic ones, right? So understanding this, you said these are all highly charged human experiences. These are all transformative human experiences. What is the role of the appearance of the owl in particular in the transformation? Why do you think, from your research, that it's showing up?
Okay. Archetypally, number one, it's an alarm clock. The metaphoric alarm clock. It is here to wake us up. It is here to wake the individual up to some higher cause, to some transformative event, to, so like if you're asleep and it's time to wake up, whispering in the ear sometimes doesn't work. The person just stays asleep. You really got to shake them. And if that doesn't work, like you send in the owls. Now, the other one would be that they are here to announce initiation. Like that feels pretty strong to me. And it's kind of a loosey-goosey thing. You kind of massage the story a little bit and kind of say, well, that kind of fits in some of them, but it really fits in some others too. And then another one is simply that the owl is an archetype. We are confronted with an archetype, right? So the owl, it's a real owl, shows up. I got lots of stories where like, oh, like I was walking through the woods, an owl landed on a tree branch. I looked up at the owl, like, isn't that interesting? The owl flies off in a flying saucer, or more particularly, usually it's a triangle. I don't know, don't ask me why, but a triangle will float over this person in the woods at night. Now, that's the pattern. The owl shows up first. The UFO shows up second. I got some where it's flipped around, but very few. So it is there as a punctuation points in a like sometimes I'll say, like, I have a keyboard in front of me on my computer here, and it has a exclamation point. Like I got no emotional, like I'm not invested in that key on the keyboard. But if I want to punctuate a sentence and change it from the other sentences in the paragraph, I can do that very easily by pushing that single key. Actually, I got to push shift too at the same time. So it's cheating. I got to push two keys. But that key, the exclamation point, changes the sentence. And I would say that the owl is doing the same thing in the context of a UFO event or a mystical meditation event or when someone's parent dies. It is simply putting emphasis on that already powerful experience. So that's as best as I can do. People ask me all the time, what do the owls mean? And I'm only guessing. I can riff on it, and I can probably sound pretty smart and make a good point, but I'm only speculating.
Well, I think it's really interesting. I am interested in something that I keep seeing repeating in these patterns repeating in these narratives. And I don't focus only on owl experiences, obviously, but the idea that these experiences serve as a type of initiatory process, I think stands out pretty clear to me, even if the individual doesn't necessarily use that word. It seems to take on the structure of an initiatory experience into a very different understanding of the world and a very different understanding of the self in relation to the world, right? Like a very profound process of transformation. I actually, when I was doing my small experiencer study, I found a lot of people who are also Reiki healers.
Unbelievable, yeah.
Reiki healers, and what was the other one? It was another type of energetic spiritual healing. It was very
sound healers,
yeah. So and just having a connection, right? Feeling, like you said, the psychic abilities for a lot of people become very strong and very pronounced in the aftermath of either a UFO or, as you say, some kind of encounter with a non-human being, or just some type of anomalous experience. I really don't think that you can, even Jacques Vallée said that. He said the most profound thing going on here is that something happens to people in the aftermath of these experiences. Like, they're never the same. They go through some kind of a profound sense of transformation where they have, I've noticed, a very different understanding of themselves and just of human beings and what a human being is and how a human being kind of relates to the world around them, right? Even a different way of grounding their ethical relations, or their way of being in the world. So the owl showing up as a punctuation mark, or you say like an emphasis, or just kind of an announcement. You said an announcement, the initiation, or the alarm clock, drawing your attention to something. I mean, that
an archetype. It's a powerful archetype. Your attention is being drawn to. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that makes sense to me from at least a phenomenological point of view when we see what people report. in these experiences. So I guess my last question for you, or I mean, is there anything on this topic that you feel that you're, dying to get off your chest, or that you feel would be really important for our viewers, somewhere that you've wanted to take this that you've not been able to take it yet?
Oh, I mean, here, can I tell a little story?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So this is, I mean, what I like to do is tell the story, because the story gives the listener a mood.
Okay.
You're confronted with a. So a woman contacts me. Her name is Laura. She is talking out to her father on the phone, and she pulls into her driveway, and there's something in the driveway. Her immediate thought is it's a child. There's a little kid in the driveway, but no, it's an owl. So she hangs up the phone. Dad, I got to go. She hangs up the phone and pulls into the driveway. And as she pulls in, the owl flies up into a tree right next to the driveway. And she calls her son out, her teenage son. Come on, come on, come on, come out. Like, you got to see this. There's an owl. There's this big owl in the tree. So he comes out. The son is standing next to her. The owl leaves the tree, flies right over her head, and touches her on the top of the head. And the boy is like, Mom, are you okay? Are you hurt? And she was like, oh my God, it was so gentle. It was so gentle. It was such a magical moment. It was so gentle. It touched the top of her head with its talons. And then, now there's a whole kind of collection of events that clustered right around this time. She she goes on a walk with a friend. She calls it she calls him her metaphysical friend. And they do the same walk all the time in this trail near the house. And then they were coming back, and it was that by the time they came back, the sun was down. It was nighttime. So they get to the parking lot, and they look up in the parking lot, and there's a structured craft like moving over the parking lot. She actually got a picture of it. The picture doesn't look like much. It looks like some dots, which is typical of trying to take a picture with a camera. But she described it as a structured craft with lights on it that moved right above the parking lot. And then she said something. She said, oh, and everything in the parking lot turned red. The asphalt turned red. The trees turned red. The cars turned red. Everything turned red. And then it kind of went back again. Now, I've heard that very rarely with other colors. I've never heard it with red. I've heard it with green in other situations. But so here's like this weird thing. So now, also in this cluster of events, she was at her son's Little League baseball game. She's in the stands, the little stands there, and the lady next to her kind of starts a conversation. She doesn't really know her, just parent from the neighborhood, and says, hey, what's going on in your life? And the lady goes, not good. Things are not good. She said, I need a kidney or I'll die. I need someone to donate a kidney or I'll die. And the lady says, I'll give you mine. And the lady says, no, it doesn't work like that. Like, we have to be compatible. You have to go see a doctor. You have to go take some tests. And she says, I'll take the tests. So she goes and takes the tests. And when the doctor calls her back with her test results, she said, is this woman your sister? She goes, no, it's not my sister. So I was going to ask, is this your twin sister? You are perfectly aligned for giving your kidney to this woman. So the woman gives her kidney away. The other woman is doing great. This is in the aftermath of all this. So I asked her, what were you talking about with your father when you pulled into the driveway? And the owl was there. She said, I was telling my dad I had made the decision and I'm going to give my kidney to this stranger in the neighborhood. So I don't have to ask this lady if she's a Reiki healer, right? I don't have to ask if she's got healing abilities. Like I don't know if I would give my kidney to a stranger at the Little League baseball game. So I could spend an hour trying to back engineer what may or may not have happened, but I can tell you what, this story makes me feel something. The story has wow, does this story make me feel something? I would have a hard time trying to articulate what that feeling is, but I feel it. And that, in my research, that is what feels most important to me. Sharing these stories, I editorialize on them a little bit, but I try to do it as little as possible. And that's what I'm left with, is these hopeful accounts. They're not all hopeful, but I'll tell you, there's a pattern of this beauty in these stories.
Let's go back to the feeling, because you mentioned that earlier and we didn't really completely unpack it. You say it's not just the story itself, but it's not just the experience itself. It's not just what appears. It's not just what is there in the conscious experience, but it's the feeling that it evokes. It seems not only in the individual itself, but the power that this has to evoke similar feeling in others, right? So what I mean, you said you had trouble putting into words the feeling that it evoked to you, but if you were to put into words, how these experiences feel to the individuals or the subjects, the conscious subjects who have them, how would you describe that?
Magic. I would say it's a fairy tale made real. It's a myth made real. It's a real life experience that has the power of and beauty of the very best and most subtle fiction. My strong sense is, and I'm not saying this, I'm saying this because of the flood of letters I get day after day, is that this is common. I mean, the simplest story, like the story I told when the man walked out from the hospital after his father died and confronted the owl. Like, I can't. I mean, I can tell that story in 30 seconds, and I can watch people start to tear up. That story has a beauty to it. So that feeling that, like, if you were an author and wanted to pull the heartstrings of the reader, you could set the story up. You could set the novel up, right? So, when Bambi's mother gets killed, like, you're like that, there's no way to not feel emotional about that. But reality is confronting us, or it's confronting me in particular, because I'm the caretaker of these owl stories, with that kind of symbolic power. And I, as I said before, I don't want to overanalyze it. So that feeling, it's hopeful to me. It's sometimes the stories are really scary, but that doesn't make it a bad story. So I'm, and then to be fair, I got to be totally, like, I recognize fully that people are having a hard time, and that some people's experiences feel they create a crisis. They feel like trauma. Like, I'm not denying that. But and then again, I will say, like, I don't know the agenda of these of the of whatever's going on behind the curtain with this other acting with us, and I am probably guilty to some degree of sugarcoating things in a way to keep me spinning into despair, let's say. But but that's human nature, and I want to front load all of this. That, like, I'm not really objective. I'm subjective in the way I'm looking at this stuff, because I've had the own direct experience. The story that I started out with, right, with Kristen in the mountains and the owls, and the voice in my head that says this has something to do with UFO. That's a UFO story. There was a voice in my head. UFOs are part of that story. And then God being in that thing. So after that event, I spent the next 7 years or so really struggling. Like, I was confronted with so many synchronicities in the aftermath of that. Those synchronicities revolved around UFOs and owls. I was struggling. It felt like my sanity was teetering on the edge of oblivion in a way. And I, in that dark night of the soul, like, I can cautiously, that's like says, I can cautiously reflect on how that might seem like the shamanic initiation. I'm not saying I'm a shaman, but I'm saying these events have that kind of power. So we are confronted with something with an amazing archetypal power, changes people's lives. My life changed completely. The next day, it felt like after that event, there was no UFO in that story besides a voice in my head. But I started researching myself. I started looking at my own contact experiences, and wow, did that open up the floodgates. And I was at the receiving end of synchronicities. That was the most powerful set of things that happened in the aftermath of my own experiences with Kristen. But my life changed. I lost my old job. I lost a lot of my old friends. I gained a new career. I got a bunch of new wonderful friends, and I mean, I can just, my life just made it right. I can just, there's a point I can look just on the timeline of my life, and it happened right there that day. And before then, my life was like this. After, my life was something different.
I mean, I think this is all really powerful and important. And I know that some, argue that, especially, the emotionality of these experiences, like, should really just be left out of it because, it doesn't really tell us anything about the truth of the object. It maybe is just people, having reactions, and, that doesn't say anything about the essence of what actually appeared. But I don't see it that way because, I mean, what you're saying is all very familiar, I guess, is what I'm saying. And it happens enough times. And, Sharon Hewlett-Rawlett's work on the source and significance of synchronicities, I mean, she even shows that mathematically these powerful synchronicities happen, far more often than they should if it was all just pure chance. And I think when you said that feeling of magic or that feeling of overwhelm, that people report, it feels like these experiences are reflecting back a feeling that we're embedded in something that is, much bigger than we understand, I think. And I don't want to speculate, like I said, any further than that, but this seems integral. When I study this, it seems integral to be paying attention to how these experiences change people, to how they make people feel, to the emotions that they evoke, because it's not just, it's not just, oh, I had a profound feeling of love, and then I went back to my normal life. It's more of what you're saying. It's like, this serves as like kind of a gateway into a whole new way of orienting oneself in the world, a whole new understanding of what the human being is and the nature of the reality that you're potentially embedded in. And the UFO and the owl, and other types of anomalous experiences, I think this was also something that Jim Madden said when he was on here. It's asking us to step back and maybe see some enchantment in the world again.
Oh yeah.
Just like re-enchanting, putting a little bit of the magic and the wonder and the awe back into our experience. So that resonates with you.
Oh, 1,000%. I cannot allow myself to be astonished, right? Because that was the problem I had after the owls with Kristen. Like I was like in this frazzled, I was like astonished in the way where it felt like my adrenal glands were all like I was in a perpetual state of crisis in a way because of the synchronistic stuff that was happening could not be dismissed as just normal happenstance. And I, like, reality wasn't acting the way I was taught is supposed to act. It was acting something in an entirely different way. And I'm still at the receiving end of plenty of synchronicities, but I'm much more peaceful with them. And I'm allowed to be in awe of these experiences, which is something different than being astonished. And also what happens is people contact me and they tell me these stories. And they say, this is like, this happened to me. This story happened to me. This was real. It really happened to me. I can't tell my wife. I can't tell my boss. But I'm telling you, they're telling me. And I can say, listen, you're not alone in this. I've heard that story or something very similar to it, once a week for the last 16 years. So you are not alone. I would argue that this is part of this is part of what it means to be human, is to be able to be at the receiving end of this. Now, if we were living in a society in the jungles of Brazil, and we had a different idea of our connection to the world and the connection to the nature and connection to reality, we might have a much more a better way to process and to organize these things in our own minds, as well as how to talk to the members of our village, presently our village is something totally different. We don't have the, well, actually, I'll argue that we do have it a little bit better because we have the internet now, and we can have the conversation you and I are having right now, where you turn the clock back not too long ago, this was not normal dinner table conversation. So, but it feels like it is turning into that now. So something is changing collectively for the much for the better, and I hope that continues. And that sense of awe is what I was in a way describing when I said the flavor and mood of these stories and how it feels. It's that magic spark of awe.
So I think that's a beautiful place to end it. I really want to thank you for coming on. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I've enjoyed the different places that it went. It went a little different than the questions that I had, but it was fine because it flowed naturally, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise here with us today.
Thank you. I wouldn't call it expertise, but I feel like I'm kind of the crazed zealot, as opposed to the seasoned researcher. Yeah. So.
Well, you have absolutely shared your knowledge of these experiencer testimony, these experiencer stories, and I mean that's an important source of knowledge in this conversation. So I appreciate what you brought today and what you're bringing to the space and the conversation in general, because I think it's really important.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I would like to thank our viewers for joining us for this episode of Phenomenology of the Phenomenon. And one more thank you to my guest, Mike Clelland, the Owl Man, the author of The Messengers. The series is produced by the Society for UAP Studies. I am the host, Kimberly Engels, and I look forward to seeing you next time.